I was ordered to break my master's daughter, so I built her instead. The plantation records show my assignment in 3 words: exercise and discipline. What they don't show is the threat that came with it. If she lost weight too slowly, I'd be sold. Too quickly, I'd be whipped. If she was injured, I'd be hanged. I was given 6 months to reduce her body to acceptable size. 6 months to prove I could control a white woman through force and fear. The master expected cruelty, expected me to humiliate her, to teach her that her flesh was enemy requiring punishment. Instead, I gave her measured work, consistent progression, gradual loads that built capacity instead of breaking spirit. I followed his orders precisely, but I refused the assumptions underneath them. By month 5, she could carry 50-pound sacks, could walk 5 miles without stopping. Her body had changed exactly as ordered, but she wasn't broken. She moved with confidence, met eyes where before she'd avoided them. This confused him. He'd gotten what he asked for, but not the way he expected. He called me to his study 3 days before the deadline and said, "She does not fear you." That was the real failure in his eyes. Not that results were wrong, but that I'd succeeded without terror. The official record was rewritten. The physician got credit. My name was erased. The system required the success to come from white authority, not slave knowledge. So I'm asking you now, if you're ordered to destroy someone and you choose to build them instead, is that resistance? Or is it just survival wrapped in strategy, and does the difference even matter when both people make it out alive? The owner announced his decision in the yard. On a Tuesday morning, he stood on the gallery of the main house, looking down at the assembled slaves. His voice was clear, practiced, carrying the weight of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. He said his daughter had become too heavy, that her size was unseemly, that it reflected poorly on the family, that something must be done. He said this as if her body was a problem he owned, as if her flesh was property requiring management. He said he had consulted physicians, that they recommended exercise and discipline, that the treatment required strength and supervision. Then he pointed at me. He said I was the strongest slave on the plantation, that I would be responsible for his daughter's correction, that I would design and oversee her regimen of labor and discipline until her body returned to acceptable proportions. Eyes turned toward me, dozens of faces showing different reactions: pity, curiosity, relief that they had not been chosen. I kept my posture neutral, my face empty, my voice absent. This was not a request. This was not an opportunity. This was an order framed as assignment, delivered in public to prevent refusal. I netted what wobbled to me. The owner smiled, satisfied. He dismissed us back to work. I returned to the fields carrying new knowledge. I had just been given responsibility for the body of a white woman, the daughter of the man who owned me, a task that could end in punishment regardless of outcome. If she lost weight too slowly, I would be blamed for insufficient rigor. If she lost weight too quickly, I would be blamed for excessive cruelty. If she was injured, I would be blamed for carelessness. If she refused to cooperate, I would be blamed for inadequate control. There was no version of this that did not end with me being held responsible for forces I could not control. I had been given an impossible task, and impossible tasks were how the system eliminated people it wanted gone. The household shifted around the order immediately. The owner's daughter, her name was Margaret. Though I would never speak, it was kept behind curtains after the announcement. She did not appear at meals. She did not walk the grounds. She became invisible while her body was discussed openly. Servants whispered about her size, about her habits, about whether she ate in secret, about whether the treatment would work, about what kind of exercises a slave would make a white woman perform. The whispers treated her body the same way I had seen bodies treated on auction blocks, as object, as problem, as thing to be measured and corrected and sold. I kept my eyes on the floor when I worked near the main house. I did not look at windows where she might be. I did not acknowledge the whispers. I made myself as unremarkable as possible while waiting for private instructions. Those instructions came the next day. The owner called me to his study. He closed the door. He told me to sit, which was unusual enough to make me cautious. He explained what he wanted: exercise, labor, discipline that would reduce his daughter's size without harming her station. He said she should lift things, carry things, walk distances, work in ways that would burn flesh without appearing to be field labor. He said I should feed her less, but not so little that she became ill. He said I should push her but not break her. He said I should create results without creating scandal. He said this while looking at me with absolute certainty that I understood, that I would comply, that I would deliver outcomes he wanted through methods he did not want to know about. Then he told me the truth underneath, the order. He said if his daughter was not reduced to acceptable size within 6 months, I would be sold. If she was injured during treatment, I would be whipped. If anyone heard her complain about improper conduct, I would be hanged. These were not warnings. These were facts. The boundaries of my survival. I listened carefully. I committed every word to memory. I asked no questions. When he dismissed me, I left understanding exactly what had been done. I had been given responsibility without authority, risk without protection, a task designed to fail in ways that would justify my elimination. I was assigned space near the mill and kitchens, a small workshop area where equipment was stored. This would be where Margaret would exercise, where I would supervise her labor, where the impossible task would be attempted. I spent 2 days preparing the space, not for what the owner wanted, for what I knew would be necessary to survive this. I mapped schedules, learned when the mill was loudest and when it was quiet, learned when kitchen staff worked and when they rested, learned the routes that avoided traffic and attention. I positioned the workshop so it was visible from multiple angles. No enclosed spaces, no privacy that could be misinterpreted. Everything open where witnesses could see that nothing improper was happening. Then I designed the work itself, not what the owner expected, not punishment or cruelty or dramatic exertion, just measured, consistent, progressive labor designed around a principle I had learned from my own body. I had been sick as a child, fever that left me weak for months. I survived by rebuilding strength slowly, small amounts of work, rest, gradual increase, patience over intensity. This was what I would give Margaret, not because I cared about her specifically, but because her survival was my survival. If she succeeded, I lived. If she falsified, my incentive was aligned with her outcome in ways the owner had not considered. The work began on a Monday. Margaret arrived at dawn, accompanied by a house servant who stayed to observe. She was breathing hard just from the walk to the workshop. Her face showed shame and anger and resignation. I did not make eye contact. I kept my voice flat and functional. I explained the work: carry this bucket of grain from here to there 10 times, then rest. She stared at me, waiting for cruelty, for mockery, for the kind of treatment she had been taught to expect when slaves were given power over white bodies. I gave her none of it. I just pointed to the bucket and waited. She picked it up, struggled with the weight, walked slowly across the workshop, set it down, breathed hard. I counted. 1. She did it again and again. The 10th time, she could barely lift the bucket. Her hands shook. Her breath came in gasps. I told her to rest, gave her water, let her sit for 10 minutes. Then we did it again. Different task, smaller weight, different movement. The first day ended without comment. No drama, no spectacle, just work measured in small increments. The house servant left looking disappointed. Servants watched for spectacle that did not come. They expected humiliation, expected to see Margaret broken or crying or refusing, expected something they could gossip about. But I kept routines ordinary and visible. The work looked like work, boring, repetitive, unremarkable. This frustrated them. Spectacle was entertainment. My refusal to provide it made me uninteresting. Curiosity turned to impatience. They stopped watching as closely, found other things to occupy their attention. This was strategic. the more boring the work appeared. The less scrutiny it received. The less scrutiny, the more control I had over actual methods. The owner checked progress after 1 week. Too early. Bodies do not change in 1 week. But he wanted visible evidence that his order was being followed. I showed him the schedule, the list of tasks, the measured progression of weights and distances. I presented only process, not outcomes. He was dissatisfied. He wanted results. Wanted to see his daughter reduced already. I reminded him quietly, carefully, that he had given me 6 months, that rushing would risk injury, that physicians had warned against extreme measures. He accepted this. Barely. His face showed impatience, but he could not argue with his own timeline. Pressure increased anyway. His expectations were unrealistic, and when reality failed to match expectations, blame would need somewhere to land. I returned to work knowing the clock was not just counting 6 months. It was counting down to the moment when patience exhausted and consequences arrived. Work repeated through weeks that began to stack. Lifting, walking, carrying, rest. Increase the weight slightly. Increase the distance slightly. Rest, repeat. I kept pace consistent, never extreme. Never pushing so hard that injury happened. Never so easy that progress stopped. This required watching Margaret carefully without appearing to watch her, reading her breathing, her color, the way her hands gripped weights, the pace of her steps. Bodies communicate when you know how to listen. Hers was telling me what it could handle and what would break it. I adjusted based on what I heard, not based on what the owner demanded. Diet was altered quietly through coordination with kitchen staff. I could not order changes directly. I had no authority over the main house kitchen, but I could suggest, could mention to the cook that smaller portions spread through more meals might support the work better than large meals twice daily. The cook understood without me saying it directly. She had her own reasons for helping. Maybe kindness. Maybe recognition that we were all trapped in the same system, just different positions. Portions were measured, reduced gradually. Not starvation, just less excess. As rishi food. More vegetables and grains. Less meat and butter and cream. Subtle changes that accumulated slowly. Margaret's breathing eased over weeks. Her steps lengthened. The bucket that made her shake on day 1 became manageable by week 4. I adjusted loads upward. Kept the challenge consistent even as her capacity grew. Watchers misread the cause. They thought the work itself was why she was changing. They did not see the diet adjustments. Did not understand that bodies respond to combined factors. Not single interventions. This served me. Their misunderstanding meant they thought I was working her harder than I was. Thought I was being cruel when I was actually being careful. Rumors started seeking scandal. Someone said they heard Margaret cry. Someone else said they saw bruises. Another claimed I had touched her inappropriately. None of this was true, but truth did not matter. Rumors were how the system justified punishment when actual evidence was absent. I kept doors open during all work sessions, kept tasks public, made sure house servants could see everything that happened. When accusations came, I had witnesses who could contradict them. Kitchen staff who confirmed Margaret was never alone with me. Other slaves who saw the open workshop, the proper distance maintained, the absence of anything improper. Suspicion lost fuel. The rumors faded when they could not find evidence to sustain them. But this made me more dangerous. I was succeeding where others expected failure, and success without scandal was suspicious in its own way. 3 months in, the owner demanded faster results. Margaret had lost weight. Her body showed visible change, but not enough for his impatience. Not dramatic enough to satisfy his expectations. He wanted me to increase the work, push harder, create faster outcomes. I refused. Carefully, indirectly, I cited safety, said pushing too hard would risk injury, reminded him of his own warning if she was harmed. I would be punished. This trapped him. His own threat became my protection. He could not demand I risk injury when he had made injury a punishable offense. But he tested me anyway. He brought in a physician to evaluate Margaret's progress and recommend harsher measures. The physician suggested reducing her food further, increasing exercise to twice daily, adding manual labor like scrubbing floors. The owner looked at me, waiting for compliance. I pulled out the written order he had given me initially. I read it back to him. It said exercise and discipline, but said nothing about starvation or twice daily sessions or floor scrubbing. I said I was following his order, his exact order. Nothing more, nothing less. This was dangerous. Slaves do not correct owners. Do not cite their own words back to them. Do not limit compliance to exact specifications. But I was gambling that his pride mattered more than his anger, that being shown to have given an adequate order mattered more than punishing me for following it precisely. The gamble paid off. Barely. He dismissed the physician's recommendations, told me to continue current methods, walked away angry, but without justification to punish. Responsibility shifted back to him. If the current approach failed, it was his order that failed, not my implementation. Changes became undeniable but not dramatic by month 5. Margaret had lost significant weight. Her breathing was easy, her movements fluid. She could carry loads that would have broken her on day 1. But the change was gradual enough that people who saw her daily did not fully register it. Only those who remembered her from the announcement saw the full difference. This was strategic. Dramatic change attracted attention, questions, scrutiny about methods. Quiet became normal, stopped being interesting. I documented routines without interpretation, kept records of weights lifted, distances walked, tasks completed, numbers only, no commentary about what they meant. When the owner asked about progress, I showed him the numbers, let him interpret them however he wanted. This protected me from both directions. If he was satisfied, the numbers proved success. If he was dissatisfied, the numbers proved I had followed the plan consistently. Expectations cracked as the 6-month deadline approached. The owner had expected spectacle, had expected his daughter to be dramatically reduced through harsh treatment that proved his authority. Instead, he got gradual change through measured work, results without theater, success without the demonstration of power he wanted. This confused him, made him uncertain about what to claim as victory. He had gotten what he asked for, his daughter's body reduced to more acceptable size. But he had not gotten it the way he expected, had not gotten to display cruelty as virtue. And now he faced a choice: acknowledge that I had succeeded, or find a way to reframe outcomes so that his authority remained central. I maintained consistency through this uncertainty, did not explain, did not interpret, did not help him construct the narrative he wanted. I just kept working, kept following the schedule, kept producing the results he demanded without giving him the spectacle he expected. The confrontation came 3 days before the 6-month deadline. The owner called me to his study again. His face showed anger poorly masked as curiosity. He asked how I had done it, how I had achieved results, what methods I had used. I told him the truth: exercise, measured progression, Terry adjustment. Kiston work over as he wanted Marty, wanted me to admit to some trick, some secret, some deviation from his orders that would explain success he did not understand. I gave him nothing, just repeated the basic methods, made it sound simple because it was simple. Bodies respond to consistent stimulus over time. This is not mysterious. This is just biology, but my simplicity made him angrier. He wanted complexity, wanted something he could claim as his own idea or reject as improper deviation. He said it should have required more force, more discipline, more demonstration of his authority over his daughter's body. I said nothing. There was no safe response. Then he said something that revealed the real problem. She does not fear you. This was it. This was the actual failure in his eyes. Not that results were insufficient, not that methods were wrong, but that his daughter had not been terrorized in the process, had not learned to fear the slave-given temporary power over her body. The success was incomplete because it did not include her humiliation. I understood then what I had actually done. I had followed his orders precisely while refusing to participate in the cruelty he assumed would be necessary, and in doing so, I had exposed something he did not want exposed, that results were possible without brutality, that authority did not require fear. This made me dangerous in a new way, not because I had failed, because I had succeeded wrong. The owner stood in his study, staring at me, trying to articulate the problem. He said, "You were supposed to break her resistance." I said nothing. He said, "She should have learned submission, should have been reduced in spirit as well as body." I kept my face neutral, my breathing steady. He said, "Instead she seems stronger." This was the paradox he could not resolve. His daughter's body had been reduced as ordered, but her demeanor had not been broken. She moved with confidence now, held herself differently, met eyes where before she had avoided them. Physical change, without psychological destruction, confused his understanding of how correction worked. I had given him what he asked for, but I had not given him what he assumed would come with it: a daughter who feared her own body, who internalized shame, who learned that her flesh was enemy requiring constant punishment. Instead, I had given her work that built capacity, that taught her what her body could do rather than what it could not be. This was not intentional kindness. This was survival strategy. Breaking her would have made her hate the work, hate me, make compliance impossible, lead to injury or refusal or scandal. Building her capacity made the work sustainable, made 6 months possible, made success achievable. But the owner saw it as failure of a different kind. Failure to reinforce the hierarchy he depended on. Failure to teach his daughter that correction required suffering. He dismissed me without resolution, without acknowledgement of success or declaration of failure. Just frustrated dismissal. I returned to work knowing the situation was more dangerous now than when it began. I had succeeded at the task, but failed at the unspoken requirements underneath it. And unspoken failures were always harder to survive than explicit ones. The daughter's body showed change without harm over the final weeks. She could lift 50-pound sacks, could walk 5 miles without stopping, could work through tasks that would have destroyed her 6 months prior. But there were no bruises, no tears, no visible evidence of suffering. This became a problem in ways I had not anticipated. The owner needed proof that correction had been harsh, needed evidence he could show to relatives, to physicians, to other plantation owners who had daughters with similar problems. But I had left him no evidence, had kept everything measured, progressive, safe, had protected both Margaret and myself by avoiding anything that would mark either of us. Now that protection became suspicious, made people question whether real work had happened, whether I had been too lenient, whether success was legitimate or somehow fraudulent. I stepped back from proximity as the final week approached, reduced my direct involvement, had Margaret work independently while I supervised from distance, made sure we were never alone, never close enough for whispered conversation. This was necessary. Credit was becoming dangerous. If people believed I had helped Margaret, actually helped her, rather than punished her, that created questions about my motivations, about whether I had feelings beyond compliance, about whether I had crossed boundaries that were supposedly uncrossable. Better to be invisible, to let the outcome exist without clear attribution to my methods. The household reframed everything on the final day of the 6-month period. The owner announced that his daughter had been successfully treated through modern medical understanding and supervised exercise. He thanked the physician who had consulted. He mentioned proper diet and maternal oversight. He did not mention me. This was erasure as survival. I understood it immediately, watched it happen with relief rather than resentment. The owner was claiming credit while removing me from the narrative. This meant I was no longer threatening, no longer a problem requiring solution. Records were adjusted to match the new story. The physician was recorded as primary supervisor. The owner's wife was noted as having managed dietary changes. My name appeared only as assistant labor in the margins. I accepted invisibility. It was safer than recognition, safer than being remembered as the slave who had succeeded at an impossible task. The owner avoided public acknowledgement but gave me private indication that the threat had passed. He did not thank me. That would have been impossible. But he reassigned me to skilled work rather than field labor. Gave me carpentry tasks. Let me work with relative autonomy. This was as close to reward as the system allowed. Not freedom, not safety, just slightly better conditions. Slightly more control over my days. I took it without comment, without expectation that it would last. Just recognition that for now, the danger had passed. Margaret moved freely within the household grounds, but remained guarded. Her body had changed, but her circumstances had not. She was still her father's property in all ways that mattered, still subject to his decisions about her future, her marriage, her life. The weight loss had been about his pride, not her autonomy. She understood this. I saw it in the way she carried herself, stronger physically, but still constrained by the cage of her position. We never spoke after the 6 months ended, never acknowledged what had happened. She returned to her life. I returned to mine. But sometimes I would see her walking the grounds, moving with the confidence that came from knowing what her body could do. And I wondered if she understood that the work had been designed to build rather than break. I wondered if she knew I had refused the cruelty her father assumed was necessary. I will never know. We existed in different worlds, despite sharing the same ground. Her silence was required by propriety, mine by survival. Servants stopped watching for scandal once the official story settled. The dramatic narrative they expected never materialized. The whispers died. Attention moved to other household concerns. The system had a way of absorbing disruption, of rewriting events to fit accepted patterns, of making the unusual become routine through repetition and official denial. Within months it was as if the 6 months had never happened, or had happened exactly as the official story claimed: medical treatment supervised by a physician, dietary management by the mistress, exercise as prescribed therapy. My role evaporated from collective memory. I became furniture again, background, unremarkable. This was exactly what I needed, what I had worked to achieve from the beginning. The story was rewritten without my name over the following years. When relatives visited and asked about Margaret's transformation, the owner told them about modern medical science, about the Philadelphia physician who had consulted, about dietary discipline and supervised exercise. No mention of the slave who had actually designed and implemented the work. No acknowledgement that the methods came from someone who understood bodies through experience rather than theory. This was necessary erasure. The owner could not admit that a slave had possessed knowledge he lacked, could not acknowledge that I had succeeded where he would have failed. So the narrative was constructed to exclude me entirely, to make success appear to have come from proper white authority following proper white expertise. I stored the truth inward, carried it the way I carried other truths the system required to remain unspoken. The knowledge that I had protected to people Margaret and myself through methods that refused cruelty while delivering results. The knowledge that I had exposed a flaw in the system's assumptions. That correction did not require breaking. That compliance did not require fear. The knowledge that measured work and patience could achieve what force and punishment could not. These truths were mine alone. No one else would ever acknowledge them, but carrying them mattered anyway. Time compressed the memory into something I examined occasionally during the years that followed. I continued carpentry work, built furniture, repaired buildings, taught younger slaves the trade, lived the remainder of my bondage in relative stability, one married, had children, taught them what I could about surviving systems designed to break them. When freedom came too late for most of my life, but before my death I built a house with my own hands. A small structure, well-made, designed to last. And sometimes, while working, I would remember the 6 months with Margaret, would think about the choice I had made to refuse the cruelty that was expected, would wonder if that choice mattered, if protecting one white woman from her father's idea of correction while protecting myself from elimination added up to something significant, or if it was just survival. just doing what was necessary to avoid being destroyed by an impossible task. I never reached a final answer. The question existed in the space between righteousness and pragmatism, between resistance and collaboration, between refusing to do harm and being forced to participate in systems of harm regardless. The owner learned something from the experience, though he never articulated it clearly. He never again assigned slaves impossible tasks with human bodies as stakes. Never again demanded transformation through methods he did not understand. This was not moral awakening. This was practical adjustment. He had learned that force cannot replace care without cost, that bodies respond to consistency rather than intensity, that fear is not the same as effectiveness. He had learned this through my success, through being shown that his assumptions were wrong. But he could never acknowledge the lesson or the teacher. So he simply adjusted behavior without explaining why. Other slaves on the plantation noticed the change, saw that the owner was slightly less quick to demand impossible outcomes, slightly more patient with processes that took time. They did not know why. I never told them, but they benefited from the invisible lesson anyway. This was the real success of those 6 months. Not Margaret's transformation, not my survival, but the slight adjustment in the system's operations, the small crack in its certainty about methods. Small changes compound over time. One owner learning one lesson does not dismantle the system, but it creates space, creates possibility for slightly better conditions, slightly more room to breathe. I am an old man now. Margaret is long dead. The owner is long dead. The plantation is abandoned ruins, but I carry the memory of refusing cruelty when cruelty was expected, of building capacity instead of breaking spirit, of succeeding at an impossible task by refusing to follow the unspoken rules about how such tasks were supposed to be accomplished. People sometimes ask about my life in bondage, about the work I did, about how I survived. I tell them about carpentry, about building things that lasted, about teaching skills to others. I do not usually tell them about the 6 months with Margaret, about being assigned responsibility for a white woman's body, about the impossible position that created. But I am telling you now, because this is a truth that should be known even though the system required it to remain hidden. I was ordered to break someone, to use my strength to destroy resistance, to teach submission through suffering. I refused. Not through open defiance, that would have been death, but through strategic compliance, through following orders precisely while refusing the assumptions underneath them. I gave the owner what he demanded: physical transformation of his daughter's body, but I refused to give him what he expected: psychological destruction, fear, submission through suffering. Instead, I gave Margaret work that built capability, that showed her what her body could do rather than what it should fear. This was not kindness. This was strategy. Her success was my survival. Her injury was my elimination. My incentive was aligned with her welfare in ways the owner had not considered. But strategy and care are not mutually exclusive. I could protect myself by protecting her, could survive by refusing the cruelty expected of me. The system assumed these were impossible to combine, assumed that slave and master's daughter could only relate through violence or fear. I proved that assumption wrong, not dramatically, not in ways that challenged the system openly, just quietly, through 6 months of measured work that delivered results without delivering suffering. This matters, not because it changed the world, not because it freed anyone or dismantled any structure of oppression, but because it proved that even within impossible positions, there are choices, small choices, strategic choices, choices that refuse to participate fully in the cruelty expected of us. The owner wanted me to be the instrument of his daughter's humiliation, wanted me to teach her that her body was enemy requiring punishment. I refuse by succeeding differently, by teaching her accidentally, strategically, that her body could be capable rather than shameful. The refusal was invisible, unacknowledged, erased from official record, but it was real, and it mattered to the 2 people whose survival depended on it. This is what I want you to understand. Strength is not just what you can lift or carry or endure. Strength is also what you refuse to do even when ordered. I was ordered to break someone. I refused by building instead. That refusal had to be invisible to be safe, had to be dressed as compliance to avoid punishment, had to succeed within the system's rules while subverting the system's expectations. But it was still refusal, still resistance, still proof that even in positions of complete powerlessness, there are ways to protect what should not be broken. The owner never understood what I had done, never saw the refusal hidden inside compliance. He just knew that something had gone wrong with his plan, that results did not match expectations, that his daughter had been changed but not in the way he intended. He adjusted, moved on, forgot. But I remember, and now you know. The slave ordered to break the master's daughter refused by building her instead, and both of us survived what should have destroyed us.